have a full pile. And then,
Okay, that's why. We'll just say red light off and you are live.
all right. Well, welcome to the Vassalboro Historical Society. And a couple of things, turn off phones, and we have refreshments after. And there's a bathroom in the office with a sink outside. So if you're in need. And would like to welcome Pearly LaChance, who's going to talk about the pilgrimage of the Gold Star Mothers from World War I. And I'm going to let him get going because I'm kind of excited to hear about this story as well, because I haven't. So, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, because to me it's important to share this information. It seems like it's little known. People are always surprised when they see the title. I'm going to start by explaining to you why I was reluctant to get involved with this project. I decided that I had had a rough experience with World War II. And the reason I say that is I got started because I was just interested in the 30 from Winslow that were casualties during World War II. And it was a Vassalboro native, Tommy Maroon, that I went and visited, and he had a copy of the list and he gave it to me. Well, what's the big deal about 30 people to do research? Well, it wasn't long where I heard that the American Legion in Waterville had this scrapbook that it turned out there was 2 3-inch binders, 1,000 pages of newspaper articles that a teacher from Waterville High School had kept from the time that the National Guard left Waterville in 42 until 1946. It turned out that it was 1,000 pages. And from gleaning all of these newspaper articles, I ended up with 7,000 veterans. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to relate. Now, my excuse for being reluctant to do this. What happened was, this very nice lady came to the house and had information on her father. Her father had been in World War II. And then she said, well, I'm going to my grandmother's to clean out her stuff. And she had these artifacts that you might find interesting. So anyway, she came back, and her grandmother had been one of these people that went on this pilgrimage. And she had saved all of these items, including, we'll go over that shoebox full of stuff ended up creating this bind. And so I says, well, the first thing, of course, if you start to do research, is go to the computer. And sure enough, I went on the computer and found this picture. Okay.
I'm going to turn the light off because it's glaring and I can't see the, oh, is that too dark?
Yes. Okay,
Better?
all right.
Better. Sorry.
So that picture turned out to be a book on the Gold Star Mothers pilgrimage of the 1930s. So now I looked at all this material, said, wait a minute, because this nice lady said, if you don't take this, I'm throwing it away. And I said, well, I'll take it and give it to a museum or whatever. But before that happened, I read the book so that I could see how all of this got started. Of course, 1930 is the year after the Great Depression started in 1929. And this congressman from New York by the name of LaGuardia introduced the first bill to help pay entirely for these trips to Europe. At first, of course, like always happens in Washington, it didn't pass at first, but eventually it went through. And it was assigned to the Army to organize these voyages. And of course, being the military, everything was very organized. One of the things that got started during World War I was the service flags, and they were with a blue star and with the red frame and white background, which eventually became the symbol for the Gold Star Mothers. And this is a picture taken in Brunswick of a humongous flag that they put across the main street. And it says in there how many?
112.
How many?
112?
112. And there was 3 Gold Star Mothers. Move on to the next one. Of course, the one thing that is talked about a lot about World War I was that they fought in the trenches. And this is just to illustrate what that looked like. The thing is that a lot of the casualties were not from different battles. There was a real problem with the influenza, and some people called it the Spanish flu. So a lot of our casualties ended dying from that. And the Magrillas, that the Winslow VFW is named after, he was a casualty of that influenza. In fact, the 4 from Winslow all died from influenza. The location of the cemetery, it was 1 in England, 1 in Belgium, and 6 in France. And this is where I started doing more and more research. If you're familiar with the bridge that they're working on between Winslow and Waterville, there used to be a plaque on the left. If you're going from Winslow to Waterville, it was on the left-hand side. And again, I have to give thanks to Vassalboro. You have one of those plaques like that. And for the 100th anniversary, somebody from Vassalboro had that cleaned. And he gave me the suggestion that it was still on the bridge at that time. And I got a bunch of people to donate money, and we had it cleaned. Finally, you could read the names. And now they've got it at the Civil War Memorial Park in Winslow. Okay. Okay, the cemeteries, again, that was a job for the Army. And also the Red Cross was also involved with this. The crosses and the Star of David were made out of wood. But by the time the 1930s came along, they were in marble, so that the mothers could see that was an improvement on the way their sons or husbands were remembered. And that's the way it looks now, because a few years back, the American Battle Association took over those cemeteries, and they do an excellent job. They're in charge of all the World War II cemeteries also. The next one. Okay, this one here, this slide shows this
Leslie Horn.
Leslie Horn. This was just to show the picture of what it was when there was wooden crosses, and then when it was the marble crosses. Okay. All right. Now, people that could afford to go to Europe back in the 20s and 30s, there were two graves that had paths leading to them. And one of them was Quentin Roosevelt, who was the son of President Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was also killed in World War II. He died of a heart attack. He was a general, and he went in with his troops. And then the other famous person was the poet Joyce Kilmer, who wrote the poem "The Tree." And this other slide shows a national forest in Robbinsville, North Carolina, that they named after Joyce Kilmer. But his grave was visited quite often by tourists that, again, could afford to go to Europe back then. Oh, another book. The Lafayette Escadrille. Escadrille is the French word for squadron. And the Americans that wanted to join the French in World War I, before the president declared war, had a choice. They could join the Lafayette Escadrille or the Foreign Legion, because they didn't have to swear allegiance to another country. Jim told me that. to try to bring this closer, there was a Ray Bridgman. Ray Bridgman was one of these people. I don't know if that, yeah, there's a picture of him there. His son was David Bridgman, and he was a professor at Colby College. So I'm trying to take these things, that are mostly in Europe, but tie them to people from Maine. Now, these articles appeared in the Lewiston newspaper. Again, the originals were part of the collection of this lady. That I think that's the next. Yeah, go to the next one. Okay. The person that we're going to be talking about was from Ellsworth, and her name was Maud DeWitt. And this is a picture of a group of Gold Star mothers at getting ready to board a ship to go to Europe. Now, like I said earlier, the Army was responsible for organizing this, and the government was funding this trip wholly. So, that one there was a little booklet that listed the people that were in one of those.
It's the main group.
Yeah, the main group. In fact, I got a copy of that book from the Colby Library of all the names of the Maine women that made that trip. Okay, the other thing that you find these little things that happen that are not that well known, and this Emil LaPlante, he has a gravestone at St. Francis Cemetery, but he's buried overseas. And parents did that because this tombstone, I've seen it in person. It pretty much tells the story of what battle and where he's buried in France. And yet he has a stone with his name in Waterville so that the family can remember the sacrifice that he made. All right, now let's get to the person that was the collector of all this material. Maud DeWitt, and her son was Alvard DeWitt, and they were from Ellsworth. And what I was able to assume that a lot of these cemeteries, especially in France, were close to where battles occurred. And when I did the research of those people on that Winslow stone, was that, Moose Argonne, all right, is one of the cemeteries, but that's also a location where there was a lot of action and battles. All right, this shows the invitation that came from the government to invite Maud DeWitt to participate in this. And they were only allowed so much time, and then they had to respond whether they wanted to participate in this. And of the number of mothers and widows, because not forget, widows were also 6,600 participated, but 9,000 said no thanks. Now you have to remember that the Gold Star mother of someone that died in 1918 or 1919 was starting to put age on, and it meant that there was a lot of health problems. But if they went, there were doctors that went along on these trips and medical people in case anything happened. Okay.
Passport.
Oh,
You wanna go back
that
to-
wasn't a big deal. That was just the envelope. She even saved the envelope that the invitation came in. And this is, they had special passports that the government provided, and they were special because on the cover it said that they were on this pilgrimage to visit their son or husbands. And I read somewhere in this material that the widows were allowed to go if they had not remarried. So, big deal. You know, what difference does it make if they died, they died and they gave to this country. Now, one of the things we hear a lot in this country is about ID cards. Well, in Europe, they've always had that as a tradition to have ID cards. So she had a passport, but she also had to have an ID card. And it indicates on the ID card that she was at the Ambassador Hotel in Boulevard Haussmann, which is like Fifth Avenue in New York. This is where all the big hotels, I've seen that, the outside of that hotel a number of times. But the government, again, took care of everything that had to be paid. The other thing with the military, they gave them badges that they had to wear, and this one here is just, I think, for the room, but there's also another badge that they wanted them to wear constantly. I think
The
it's-
baggage one.
yeah, that's just a baggage for their bags. And what happened, like in Maud's case, coming from Ellsworth, by train, of course, back then, to New York. And when they, of course, everything is a schedule and it's exact time that it took, 15 hours to get from Ellsworth to New York City. And when they got to a place where they had to change, let's say, transportation or change to go to the hotel, there was a military person there to greet the mothers. So they were never, up on their own trying to figure out, how do I get to this hotel or whatever. But they stayed at some of the best hotels. This is showing the ship that she went on to go to Europe, but she came on a different ship when she came back. But she kept, again, okay, that's showing that shot of women on the SS America. Yeah, that was the ship that Maud went on. And then, of course, she kept every little booklet and whatnot. And this is a passenger list. It reminds me of my mother when she went to Europe. She kept everything, every brochure and every postcard, whatnot. But and I think almost at the top you see her name there, Maud DeWitt.
Can I just ask a question? In
Sure.
the picture with the group of women on the America, was Maud one of these ladies?
I think so, but
Or you don't know which
but
one?
that's just my opinion.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Because there was about 200 women on each one of these
Wow.
pilgrimage. And
This was the,
yeah, this is a menu card showing a menu. And, you know, not everybody would save something like that, but it's kind of interesting to read what they were being offered for refreshment. Okay, that's the brochure from the hotel ambassador. So again, they didn't spare the expense. And this was a card. It says apartment, but that's the French way of saying room number.
that's a menu for the
Yeah.
Ambassador Hotel.
Okay, again, another menu. And then she wanted to share some of this information. So she wrote home and explained to them some of the ceremonies that occurred. One of the ceremonies that they participated in was to the tomb of the unknown soldier, which is in the Arc of Triumph in Paris. And and through a selection process, one of the mothers would be chosen to lay the reed. And one of the persons that attended some of these ceremonies was General Pershing, who was in charge of all the troops in World War One.
He's the one who designed the cemeteries.
What's that?
He designed the cemeteries.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now we're going, this is a booklet, and you'll be able to look through this. This is the booklet that's shown over there. That's where Alvard was buried, was in Moose Gone Cemetery. And this is, of course, a view of the whole. There was, what, 4,000?
14,
14,000.
almost 15
Yeah,
buried there.
yeah. And this is the groundkeeper or the director of the cemetery at Moose Gone. Each one of those military cemeteries has one of these buildings where you can get information. I know when we visited Omaha Beach and visited the Normandy World War II cemetery, it was nice that you could get directions to find a certain grave. Otherwise than that, it would take forever. Okay, one of the things that they promised these ladies to the cemetery where their son or husband was buried, they would have a wreath, and they would have an American flag, and they would have a chair where they could sit, and a professional photographer would take their picture with that grave marker. So nothing was left to guesswork, thanks to the military. Okay, now this is a booklet on traveling in Paris. And on the left-hand side, it says Place de l'Opéra. I don't know if any of you have visited Paris, but Paris is divided into circles. And in French, it's called arrondissement. And we're the opera house. And that's where they created the Phantom of the Opera. This is the first arrondissement. So that's where, and as you look at the map of Paris, it becomes an increasing number. The number one is that section. Okay, and visit to Paris in an autocar meant bus tours. And they had their choices of, well, if you look on the right, that's the famous Notre Dame that burnt and is being reconstructed. And then you had Versailles, and I won't name them all, but Versailles and Chartres, they could go on bus tours to these different spots. And this is a memorial to the American soldiers. All right, and to get from Paris to one of these cemeteries might be 150 miles away. So they went by train again. And this is a railroad station on the way to Moussagon, the cemetery we show. Again, these are the brochures of the different trips. Versailles, of course, quite a place to visit. And this is a picture of, it's a postcard of a hotel they stayed at on their way back to Paris. And this is one of the tours. And so this lady had quite a trip over there. I mean, she did all these things.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So if I knew that my family member had died and was buried in this cemetery, would I only be able to go to this cemetery, or could I go to all the different cemeteries?
Wow, that's a good question. I would imagine if they wanted to visit more than one cemetery, they would provide the access to that. Okay. This reminds me of World War II, the ration books. Because like I told you earlier, my parents ran a grocery store and they sold gas, and those ration books for gas, if you wanted to go on a Sunday drive, you had to make sure you had enough ration stamps to do that. So apparently they had that in World War I also. Again, these were handouts that they gave them, and it's hard to paste this all into the story of Maud DeWitt. Okay, this is the return trip because to go from Paris to where the ships were going to be leaving in Cherbourg. And again, everything was provided to them.
What is a souvenir log?
Yeah, this is the Harding. They came back from Europe on the SS Harding. And again, it's listing all the different items that were available to them.
It's talking about the weather.
Hmm?
The weather,
Oh,
overcast, light mist,
yeah.
each day's weather.
And no information was spared to them. Okay, this is another menu. Yeah. And again, this is her coming back from New York to Ellswood. All right. Well, I'm sorry if I hesitate on some of these, but this part of the presentation is very important to me. In 1930, you still had segregation. And the black mothers, Gold Star mothers and widows, had to go on a separate ship. And when they were in New York, that was the central place before taking off for Europe, they stayed at the YMCA in Harlem. That doesn't sound like a fancy hotel to me. Now, they had to find a black officer to go with them because that was part of the deal. Each group of ladies went with a military, and usually someone that had been involved in World War I. Well, when they needed a black officer, they found Benjamin Davis Sr. He was one of the highest ranked officers. He was a colonel. He was not even a general. And he volunteered to do this. And when they got to France, there were a lot of black entertainers that were working in Paris nightclubs, singers, musicians. When they landed in France, they had a group of musicians that welcomed them to France. And I need to mention Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker, who was a singer, dancer, and she played in these nightclubs in Paris. She couldn't make it in the U.S., but she became very popular in France. Of course, she was black. African American is the word I should be using. Another book. Invincible Generals. Now, Benjamin Davis eventually became a general. And they even printed a stamp with his picture. I have a copy of a letter that has him as the stamp on it. And he had a son, Benjamin Davis Jr., who, another book, went to West Point, and nobody was friendly to him. it was still that period of history in this country. Well, Benjamin Davis Jr. was a pilot. And who did he train? He trained some of the Tuskegee Airmen. The Red Tail. When they first organized this group, the white pilots that flew bombers didn't want them. And eventually they were so good at protecting the bombers, because they were on fighter planes, and that they would request for them to accompany them. So they made a DVD out of a movie out of that called Red Tails. And the reason they call them Red Tails is because they painted the tail of the plane red, so that when they were up there 10, 20,000 feet, they could spot those red tails, and they felt secure that they...
That was an excellent movie.
The Lafayette Escadrille, back for a minute, they made a movie out of that called Flyboys. So, in conclusion, this is an important part of our history, and it's not that well known. And I've done this 4 or 5 times now, and it's just to make people aware of what occurred during those time periods. I mean, we hear a lot about World War II because it's closer to, our dates right now, but the First World War was quite an event. And I'd like to...
Do you have a guesstimate of the time that may have taken you from when you started this project till when you felt that...
It never ends.
I can tell you.
I would like to give credit to my father-in-law. My father-in-law was in World War I.
And his brother.
And, it's not like he saw any big battles or whatnot. But, again, Washington had promised those veterans a bonus of maybe $50 or $100. And my father-in-law and the Legion in Waterville went to Washington to demonstrate, to try to influence the Congress to do this, come up with an answer to the promises they had made. And although General MacArthur was not a general at that time, that's who they sent to disperse these veterans, because they had set up tents. I mean, sometimes you read about these things in history and you say, oh, that's happening today. People are putting up tents and whatnot to demonstrate against some issue or other. But he was there, and I think they eventually got that bonus, but it wasn't in the thousands of dollars. Any other question? I've spent a lot of time, preparing this, but it really gets complicated because it seemed like, you read one of these books and it leads you to another. It's I guess you have to love doing this.
Hopefully the books are available at the Vassalboro Public Library.
Yeah. Well, Rachel has been a big help. Most of these books we got through Amazon.
If he mentions something, that's the first place we check.
I think it's amazing
You don't hear?
No, no, you
Yeah.
don't hear anything about it.
No. Yeah. The fact that we
It's
didn't
lost history, really, and
Yeah.
I think it's terrible.
And we appreciate you bringing it back and filling us in about it.
Well, I hope Maud is happy with
I'm sure she is.
You could
With
tell 'em
all
about
of this.
Mr. Bridgman.
Huh?
Oh, yeah. You could tell them about Mr. Bridgman. I had worked for Mr. Bridgman.
Yeah.
And one day he told me about his father had been one of these soldiers, which one was it? Anyways, when the war was over, he was living in New York, he couldn't handle what he had seen, and he jumped overboard in a ferry and drowned.
Oh, wow.
That professor, what's that movie you and I saw there about the A-bomb?
Yeah.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah. Professor Bridgman didn't like this guy at all. It's interesting, you know.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
We'll take time to look at
Yes,
your
yes,
story there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.